And
right.
one of the issues that I want to talk about right now that I don't think a lot of people have discussed is the Israel UAE peace deal.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read from this Mint Press News article that was published. And all right, there we go. They're all waving at us. Netanyahu, Donald Trump. Why Arab leaders are suddenly groveling at the chance to normalize ties with Israel. This was published by Mike Peled. He writes, as these words are being written, the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain are in Washington, D.C. to sign agreements to normalize relations between their countries and the state of Israel. While the United States and Israel were represented by President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Arab states sent their foreign ministers to represent their countries at the signing ceremony. This may have less to do with protocol and more to do with the fact that Trump and Netanyahu are fighting for their political lives, and for them, this was a much needed public relations stunt. So, just to give a rundown for people on like the Israel situation, the United Arab Emirates is the third Arab state, the third Arab nation after Jordan and Egypt to have diplomatic ties with Israel. All Arab countries did not recognize Israel as a state after they took over Palestine, the Palestinian land 53 years ago with the help of the US and Western allies. Israel is an apartheid state. It commits human rights violations against Palestinians. For years, the United States has overlooked they have looked the other way at these human rights violations. The citizens of these Arab countries are with the Arabian Palestinian people. So even within Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, the Arabian citizens, they stand with the Palestinians. They don't want to recognize Israel as a nation. But now Donald Trump, he's trying to make a spectacle out of this by having countries like the UAE and Bahrain normalize their relationships with Israel and having them recognize Israel as a state, saying like, oh, look, like I managed to have them get along. And one of the features of this peace deal is to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And Israel, goes more to show with how Israel is incrementally consuming everything that used to be Palestine. So I'll throw it over at you guys now. What are your thoughts about this peace deal?
Well, I think the Arab countries are just doing this to get F-35s. Let's not mistake it. They want American-made military weapons. That's what they're hungry for. And Trump is eager to sell them these because he's sold the Saudi Arabians the same thing. And so for Israel, this gives them credibility in the Middle East to say, hey, we have legitimacy, right? We have all these countries that are backing us now that are Arab countries. And so it kind of stifles the other Arab countries who are against Israel. So all of this is just self-interest from all parties. Everybody has a little bit of something to gain from this. And so they decided to go through it. America is still a amazing market. We are one of the most desired after consumer markets in the world. And that's for a lot of different reasons. But, that's just simply the case. And that's a big motivating factor for any country to want to, sell its stuff here, have, normal relations with us. That's going to benefit their country. And if it takes just acknowledging the state of Israel's existence to get F-35s, military arms, 21st century military weapon gears and all this, then I think that, it kind of makes sense for them to do that. It has some good stuff for Palestinians, but yeah, it's not a great deal. But they also don't have a great bargaining chip right now, so it sucks. It's unfortunate, but that's how the world kind of develops. Everybody's been in that fucking situation before as a group of people. But yeah, Israel is definitely like an ethno state, and it's very too influential.
Yeah. What do you think, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a win-win for the people involved here. Israel doesn't have very much change from their end. Trump makes it look like he's actually accomplished something, even though he defied conventional wisdom by moving the embassy. Okay, and like Israel pointed out, the Arab countries who did this are trying to get the favorability for getting the U.S. to do what we do best, and that's spread war and sell weapons. Okay. So that being said, and the reason we're not spreading too much war, a lot of people speculated why didn't Trump start another war. Some people say it's because he's actually truly anti-war. I'm kind of along the mind of one, I don't think it would be very well received at this point. I think he knows that. The other thing is can we really economically afford to start getting more boots on the ground? See, at least this way, if we sell you weapons, we're not having to fund troops to be there. We'll just sell you the crap and let you do what you want with it. Okay? So that doesn't really cost us anything. If anything, it actually makes money for us. But this doesn't really bring a peace to the Middle East. He didn't get Iran to sign this deal, for God's sakes. Okay, so it's not like you made some giant step here to bring peace to the Middle East, in my opinion. Furthermore than that, we're going to always continue to have Israel's back, right or wrong. And the reason why is because we created it pretty much. Post World War II, we wanted to find a place to put those who escaped Nazi Germany. We were going to find a country for you, right? So it just so happens that inside of Palestine was the last standing wall of King Solomon's temple, a nice little landmark to people of the Jewish faith. So we just went in and said, okay, this isn't yours anymore. We're going to give it to this group. So we created them. Therefore, they became favorable to us. Remember what happened with our CIA post-World War II, where we went around toppling elected officials and installing dictators. That's why the Iranians hate us to this day. Okay? But the one country we had in the middle of it over there who was always going to be our ally was Israel, while we were going around screwing with these other countries. So all we did was build up that resentment. So that's our one for sure ally that we created in that section of the world. So we're always going to have their back under these corrupt politicians, Democrat or Republican. Don't let them fool you. They're going to protect Israel at the end of the day, right or wrong.
Israel, the country, not Israel, our guest here.
Right. I know you'll defend me, buddy. Yeah. I know you got my back.
Yeah, we got your back, Israel. Don't worry. Israel, the person, not the country.
Yes.
So the article also brings up how Israel and the U.S., they're trying to get Sudan to normalize its relationships with Israel. Mike Pompeo met with the Sudanese prime minister, and I'm going to quote the article here about what happened. The Sudanese prime minister told Pompeo that his government, quote, had no mandate to normalize ties with Israel, quote. And he added that the subject of lifting Sudan from the state sponsors of terrorism list should not be linked to normalizing ties with Israel. Clearly, removal from the state sponsor of terrorism list is the carrot that Pompeo is offering Sudan. Now, when these countries, when they don't play ball, the U.S. with what the U.S. empire wants, they get blacklisted. And they sanction them to no end until they play ball with them. They overthrow their leaders, etc. Like they get in there, they're not shy of sending in their military. They're not shy of arming moderate rebels or terrorists there. So they'll do that until they do what the U.S. empire wants them to do. So do you guys think that Sudan is feeling pressured to do this?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the United States' MO. Like I mentioned, going all the way back to our CIA toppling of government days, we're going to lean on you one way or the other. You're either going to be favorable to us, and if you're willing to kind of halfway do business with us, you can be communist, you can be a dictator, and we'll trade with you. Hint, hint, China or Saudi Arabia. But if you don't, we're going to completely blackball you, and we're going to demonize you for decades. Hint, hint, Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
So Donald Trump, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because of this by far-right Norwegian Prime Minister named Christian Tybring-Gjedde. And he is nominating Trump despite this guy saying that he's not a fan of him, even though he's nominated Trump for this prize before. I don't think Trump will win this. I think if he does win, though, it'll show even more how corrupt the Peace Prize nomination thing is.
I don't know if I would agree with that, actually, because the guy who cured polio, you don't know what.
Oh, I mean, they do.
People these people are.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that they don't get like good people like every now and then, but I mean, they've had like Henry Kissinger win this award before.
Well, and that's something else I was going to throw out there is I don't know if he's going to win, but as far as nominations go, take a nomination with a grain of salt, because I dug into this. Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler were both nominated for Nobel Peace Prizes as well.
Yeah, and not to mention, look, Trump did do the North Korea, attempt at peace, and it's gotten South Korea and North Korea to, take the ball and move forward a little bit better. So if you guys remember in that Olympics, they flew the United Korean flag for the first time ever together, North Koreans and South Koreans. You got this peace deal. There are certain things that are good about it. So, Obama got a peace prize, didn't he? And we would all sit here in contention over that. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Trump would get it. But it does seem stacked against him.
But for like him getting Israel, which is committing acts of human rights violation.
Right, you could say the same thing if he had done it with Korea, though. You can make the same exact statement if it was Korea. There would be liberals saying the same thing you're saying. Oh, with North Korean who's a dictator who starved his people. But we as progressives would say, but that's good. We don't want war with Korea. So, you could say the same thing.
But if we're normalizing these relationships with Israel, though, and these Arab countries, won't this increase war with the other Arab nations that don't want to sign on to this thing? Like, for example, Syria and Iran. I think we have to also
consider, you have to tell us that you don't want us extinct from the earth first. Can we at least get you to say you don't want us extinct from the earth first? I don't think that's a big, it's like acknowledge that you don't want to completely destroy me, and then maybe I'll sit down and have lunch with you.
Well, I would agree with that point, but the only thing I would have to argue in response to that is this, and this is not a defense necessarily, but you've got to understand the area of the world you're dealing with, and there is a very old school prideful mentality. And when we look at, again, what has taken place to their fellow Muslims after the creation of Israel, the suppression of the Palestinian people, the toppling of Iran's own government at the hands of the United States to install a dictator, when you look at a lot of the things that have happened in that area of the world because of U.S. involvement and U.S. propping up Israel as a tool of theirs, basically, there's a serious resentment from a group of people who have a very old school way of thinking. And when you study ancient history, the old school way of thinking was basically, I don't like you, so I'm going to get rid of you. I mean, that's kind of how
two options. If we go down that path, we have two options. We have the options of abandoning them financially and leaving them to try and mend some situation with those Arab countries. The minute we do that, there is the possibility, and we must be ready, that there might be a mounted attack on that state. I don't think Franco is advocating for this. I would hope and plead that he's not advocating for this. The other thing would be to dissolve the state and move it elsewhere, in which case I would ask not only progressives who are stoking these flames, but also right-wingers, where would you put these folks? Where would the Jews go?
Well, in all honesty, I mean, I wouldn't recommend just completely abandoning them. And the reason why is, regardless of what we think about Israel, the one thing that I can tell you is this. If they were left completely on their own, I do believe they would probably face attack, and just being all honesty, because there's a lot of resentment there. And like what the U.S. is doing in Israel or not, I think one of the only reasons they haven't been severely hit by neighboring countries is the fact that the big bad bully's standing behind them saying, we got your back. Okay, right. I think that's one of the only things that has deterred people from really trying to attack that area of the country, and that would just completely start another war. But I guess what the point I was making is that it's going to be awfully hard to bring any of those countries who have that hardline stance like Iran to the negotiating table because they have just a serious resentment. We got what we got with the Iran nuclear deal, but to get them to completely,
that's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Get rid of the hate in their heart that they would want Israel to be wiped out. I think that's asking an awful lot, because to me, they've just got a view of Israel, the country, and the United States because of our own actions, kind of the way that the Nazis had against the Jews. They despise the ground they walk on.
Right. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's a lot crazier than, yeah.
I mean, these Israeli citizens, like, they are taught from, like, early on in their life to fear the Arabs. So, like, they're victims, surrounded by enemies. So I don't know, like, as a solution, like, I want everybody to know I got serious about politics very recently. Like, this is all information that I've consumed in a relatively short amount of time. So I will inform myself more about this issue. But as I see it right now, I think the best thing to do, since there are generations there who all they know is living in Israel, these people that were, these Israelis that were born there, I think the best thing to do is to have a two-state solution with Israel, Palestine, and have Israelis still protected since they are surrounded by enemies. This is just me saying, as someone who recently got more invested into politics than I did before. I don't know about you guys, what you think we could do.
I think you're on the money, sort of. I mean, I think, look, if somebody does give me a cohesive argument and can articulate a Nazistic, pacifist move of millions of Jewish generationed, people out of a place. I know if someone comes knocks on my door and tells me, look, global politics, a lot of Americans want you out. It's done deal, guy. Get on the bus, pack your stuff, let's go. Japanese internment camps, let's do it. I'd be a little hesitant. I might raise my voice a tad and voice opposition.
Yeah.
I don't like the interventionalist tactics that they do. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of organizations here in the United States who are very influential. I can stand against that while not advocating for the complete and utter abandonment of these people, just like I wouldn't the Yemenis people when they're fighting the Saudi bombers that are funded by Americans here.
Right. Yeah, and I'd throw one more thing when we get into this Middle East topic, and this is something that Jesse Ventura has been talking about for years. He's got the story of basically saying that, when Columbus set out to try to discover the New World, right? He did it because he was trying to find a trade route to India. And the reason he wanted to try to find a trade route to India was because they didn't want to go through the Middle East to get to India. Why? Because the Middle East had that much turmoil in 1492. So he was willing to take the chance of falling off what science said at the time was the face of the earth, and you'd fall off into the abyss. Mm-hmm. He was willing to do that, as opposed to traveling through the Middle East in 1492. Likewise, you can, even if you want to get into even deeper analogy here, turn to that good old Holy Bible. It's biblical that the tribe of Israel are the descendants from Abraham's son Isaac. Okay, and the Muslims are descendants from Ishmael, the illegitimate son of Abraham that they thought would please God, even though it wasn't done the way God told them to. Okay, so because if you follow that story now, okay, and it is a fact, they trace their heritage to those two sons from Abraham. It says literally in the Bible, your sons will fight till the end of time. Now, if you're not religious and you want to discard that, okay, whatever. But to me, that area of the world has been at war longer than we've been a country. You could take the amount of time we've been a country, triple it, quadruple it. They've been at war longer than that. There's been no peace amongst those people. So understand this. We can talk about how we can bring a peace deal, and if we ever brought one, great. But all I'm going to say is this. Yeah, it's a good thing to hope for, but it's certainly not one of those things. If I was a betting man, I'd put odds on, because you got hundreds of years of war we're talking about here.
Yeah,
I don't think
agree.
we should exacerbate it though by continuing to get our corporate hands on the resources of that land.
Oh, without a doubt.
Just let them handle things on their own. But
they create enough fights amongst themselves. We don't need to get in and instigate anything.
Yeah, we're throwing fuel at the fire.
Right.
So yeah, I think we mostly agree here on this issue.